President Trump moves to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization and ups the pressure to ban it from the United States. And the IDF killed Hezbollah's military chief. Is Israel going back to war in the north? This is The Deep Dive. Welcome back. Thank you for joining this week's episode. I'm your host, Jacob Laznik. Before we get into today's main stories, a lot of news has happened over the Jewish world. Here to talk about it, we're joined by our diaspora affairs correspondent, Michael Starr. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is my first time on The Deep Dive.
Welcome.
You only bring me on when crazy stuff is happening, I guess.
Well, I got news for you. You know, there's always crazy stuff, so I guess we'll be seeing more of you.
So let me specify crazy people.
Okay. Before we get into said crazy people, I think we have to address, the main top story that's happened this week. Obviously, Hamas has returned the body of slain hostage Dror Or, which now leaves the number of hostages who remain in Gaza to 2. So we're kind of, inching towards the end of the first part of phase 1 of the deal. But obviously, we're still waiting for their bodies to be returned. So yeah, you're someone who's in active reserves duty. You're getting called up again soon. What's your take on the status, how things are going?
Well, I think we're fast closing in on a time where decisions need to be made. We have, of course, the situation with the hostages that is close to being resolved, and there's the ticking clock on what's happening with the several dozen terrorists that are underground in tunnels in the Rafah area. And there's the question of disarmament of Hamas, the question of disarmament of Hezbollah. And, off of the wave of the high of the ceasefire deal and the return of all the live hostages, the remaining live hostages, these questions have sort of been delayed, which is the favorite Israeli social tactic for any problem that we face, is to kick the can down the road. We're closing in on the can, and decisions are going to have to be made on all these issues. As much as we want to pretend we got into this headspace that the war is over, as much as we want
declared,
everyone's saying it's not over, and as reservists are still getting called up. We just it was made public that reservists are going to be serving 2 months or so this year. It's for a lot of people it's not over, but for a lot of the country's gotten to this mindset that we don't need to pay attention as much anymore, and it's going to be a surprise when one of these many balls that are in the air that we need to try to catch soon is going to fall on the ground and make a mess.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about this a bit later in the episode too, but as you said, it's easy to remember or to think that, the war is over and everything's gone back to normal, but Israel's really walking this tightrope between kind of a bunch of different fragile pits and is really trying the best to stay on the tightrope. That out of the way, I want to move on to a bunch of, say, prominent figures who made news in Israel and the Jewish world this week. Starting with Peter Beinart. Depending on who you ask, a lot of him consider, super liberal anti-Israel. Some people go far enough to saying self-hating Jew. I don't think that's fair enough though. But he gave a lecture at Tel Aviv University where he received a lot of backlash, essentially on both sides. From obviously pro-Israel sides and also the BDS movement and that kind. So I kind of want to know your take on that, his appearance, and what it did. And I think it goes into this deeper discussion of these kinds of discussions that we have where, is it important for these people who are, against a certain rhetoric or narrative or et cetera to still be holding these conversations with audiences who won't necessarily warmly, openly welcome them.
Well, I think it's great that we're segueing from a hostage situation to Peter Beinart, who just released his own hostage statement, being held hostage by the BDS movement. It is important as a society, as a Western-leaning democratic society, that we do have a place for deferring opinions to be platformed and to be heard, as long as they're not engaging in incitement to violence, and which I don't think Mr. Beinart is engaged in, then of course.
No, I would agree, not at all.
Right, and if our opposition to the BDS movement is that subject matter such as art and academics should should be free of such politicization, then I don't think we can turn around and fairly try to exclude him. I think that what a lot of people are taking away from the situation with Beinart is that no matter what you do, it's never going to be enough. No amount of interaction is acceptable to them. Right. Any amount of interaction is seen as normalizing the Zionist entity as they see it. It's always going to be too much, and
so there's essentially like no room for pragmatism in any way, shape, or form.
You'll see like these individual figures like I think it was Ariel Gold who say, well, maybe you should have done it through Zoom. So there is that medium, but for the large part, no. Like any interaction, there needs to be the BDS, PAC-B, academic boycott, cultural and academic boycott said no. Any interaction is too much legitimate. They don't want Israel to exist,
right?
And so engaging with it as it exists,
kind of putting it into existence philosophically. Yeah. So I guess I'll ask: have there been like kind of similar incidents in the past, and like what tends to happen to these figures after they, like I'd say, evoke the wrath of like the BDS movement? Is his career like done for? Is he canceled in their books, or is he like? How does this?
I don't think so. What tends to happen is they go through a struggle session where they say, I will learn. I should have listened to these to the voices of the Palestinian people and the representatives of whatever group I offended, and I will strive to do better. And then they get berated for the next several months until people move on to the next target.
The next thing. All right. Well, I hope he has a very quiet waiting period until he can, continue. But no, I do agree. I do think in all mediums, like it's still important to have these kind of conversations, especially if we're talking about, speech that deserves to be protected, no matter how inflammatory or ridiculous is. That I think that segues into our next story, which is another favorite person who comes up in the headlines occasionally, Candace Owens. Mm-hmm. For those who are unfamiliar with Candace Owens, I think she has a long, string of conspiracy, both anti-Israel and not. But the latest one, right, the big one that's really making headlines, is that she allegedly had a conversation with a high-ranking anonymous French government official who has given her credible evidence that the Macrons have funded and are attempting to execute an assassination attempt on her, and that somehow Israel is also involved. Somewhere all along this, how deep does this go? If you pull on the thread of that sweater, this also turns into France was also somehow involved in Charlie Kirk's assassination, but also Israel somehow is, and also somehow there were suspicious Egyptians who were there at the time, and now she's trying to dox them to kind of pull it all together. So as someone who constantly looks at these things, because a lot of times it relates to anti-Semitism, because people believe these kinds of things, I want your take on, this as the latest development of her saga.
So honestly, I don't really write about it so much, because every day there's something new. I could, if I was so inclined, I could just write about it every single day, and that would be my job. There's just so much lore there's an ever expanding lore to the stories that Candace is putting out. It gets more and more complicated over time. The lie gets bigger and bigger as she tries to escape the consequences and fact checking of other people. Get into all the lore of it. You might as well ask someone to like summarize, the lore for Warhammer 40K or something like that. It's ridiculous. So whenever a layperson or even I hear about it, Candace is saying, making these claims. There's so many. They're based on so many other claims that are themselves so ridiculous, and right. She keeps on stating more things to kind of outpace the truth. And there's kind of this situation that she's in where she's being
the lawsuit. Yeah,
exactly, the lawsuit that she's facing for statements she made about Brigitte Macron. That I won't get into because they're also convoluted, but they were defamatory, and there's a serious legal case against her, and now all of a sudden, like, France is tied up into the Charlie Kirk assassination conspiracy theories and stuff.
But also Israel. We can't forget about Israel.
Of course, that goes without saying. They're obviously the mastermind. So it's I don't ever like talking about it.
Valid. Nevertheless, it's still got a lot of traction, especially online and in the Jewish world, from a concerned, point of view.
I think it'll gain so much mass of ridiculousness at a certain point. She's going to implode in on herself. Like, you can only expand the story so much before it pops.
No, so we'll see, but nevertheless, like, we still report on these things because
people read it.
First of all, there are people who not just read it; they believe it. There's this disconnect where I don't know if it's people want these things to be true, but they latch onto it. Where, like, this one little plausible, substantial at best connection between two things can be enough. It's like confirmation bias of, like, the conspiracy, where, like, oh, if a French person could have been at this place at this time, like, then anything's possible. So, like, this just goes deeper, and they, like, want to ride this wave.
I think that people are become so distrustful of every source that they will ironically believe anything, and I think people also feel uncertain. They live in chaotic times, and a conspiracy theory implies that there's somebody in control of things, and if somebody's in control of things, things can be controlled, and if you just fix this one simple thing, then your life can be brought back to order, and so they're denying the chaos that exists out there, and hoping that things can be made better.
Interesting. I will say, like, I'm not so surprised that this is kind of the direction it stumbled into, because I remember when, immediately right after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, Candace Owens was pushing a lot of narrative about, Israel's involvement, whether it was directly or indirectly. Mm-hmm. There's this whole saga about messages where it leaked, etc. So I think this was just a natural, easy thing to latch onto.
Well, even from Israel, expanded to people in Turning Point USA, people in the Trump administration. The list of people implicated grows and grows and grows until everyone's involved, and it loses all meaning.
Yeah, which I think also segues into the final big story of this week, when we're talking about spread and misinformation online and influence and how far things go. Mm-hmm. There was the new, and if I remember correctly, temporarily disabled feature on X, formerly Twitter, that shows where accounts are either active from or where they were created.
Right.
And it was revealed that obviously a lot of accounts, independent of what they claim to be, turns out that they were originating from places that they weren't saying that they were. But two very prominent places where this was showing up was, first of all, in, like, a lot of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic accounts, or accounts that were claiming to be from Gaza and saying things like, I live in Gaza, this is what we see on a daily basis, and this is a person from Pakistan.
Right.
And another sphere where we saw a lot of this happen is a lot of, like, MAGA sphere, pro-MAGA influencers from, like, Serbia or Nigeria or whatever. So you covered this extensively. I think I want to ask you about the anti-Semitism incident, which is, like, or the anti-Semitic accounts that ended up being not where they saying they were. Mm-hmm. Did this come as a surprise to you? Is this like something that's, like, normally in their playbook? Like, I don't know. What was your take on, like, when this came out? Like, obviously it's exciting that, like, it's a fun thing to report on because it's something that a lot of people suspect for a very long time.
Right.
But were you maybe, like, surprised by, like, the scale of how many accounts are actually just not what they say they were, despite having verification, which is, like, very easly obtained? Like, what was your take on it?
Well, first of all, I think we don't know the exact scale. There's kind of a confirmation bias where we're looking at a few counts and then saying, see, it's
yeah,
all
I knew
of
it.
them.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of people saying, is that, well, all of anti-Semitism, all of griperism on social media is all it's all inauthentic activity, which is just swinging to another extreme on how you look at media.
No, I don't think scale in terms of every single person who does that. But I would say that like there were a lot of very prominent accounts.
There were a lot of very prominent accounts. We also have to take into account that, this is indicative. It's not definitive about a lot of accounts, because there's issues. Well, okay, but they were using VPNs. They were traveling. It's a shared account. They opened it someplace else, and then they're expatriates.
Right.
There's tons of reasons why they could be from one place and be legitimate, and for it to say it's else. But it is suspect when you have an account that claims to be in New York and claims to represent anti-Zionist Orthodox Jews, and it's located, it seems, in the Philippines.
Right. Or I think like Counter APAC was Egypt.
Counter APAC was Egypt.
It has a lot of posts about in America we don't want.
Right, and a lot of these accounts. There's also a lot of these censored news accounts where they will call them. They will have some word indicating how they were silenced or suppressed, and something like that, to indicate that it's subversive alternate news that people don't want you to know about. And so a lot of these were revealed to be suspect. But I think that it's the common thread is that you see every issue in which there's a fault line, there were fake accounts on both sides.
Right.
And trying to increase the polarization. Either we don't know if it's because that the inherent polarization in those issues, be it traditional MAGA versus gripers or pro-Israel, anti-Israel, if that polarization could be used to get more attention or to use the monetization of it to just get more money.
I'm sure there are also people who aren't so invested. They just see that it garners attention.
Right, exactly. But I think also it's yes, was it surprising? I think a lot of people were naive. Americans were naive about how much of the discourse was genuinely American. I think there is this America-centric view where they were saying, well, we're talking about United States, and they didn't really think about, well, this is the internet. It's connected to the world.
Who this person on the other side of the screen is, yeah.
Right, but there was just an assumption in general that everyone is American online, and then it seemed to shock them when it was actually the World Wide Web.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you think of it in hindsight, it's not so shocking that anybody could have done this, but like as you said, I think people got so focused on the confirmation bias or like what they wanted to be true, and that kind of just went out the window. So I guess in closing, I think this just brings to light kind of what we already knew, which is that like when you see stuff online, do your own research, really make sure that what you're looking at is what you're looking at. Don't take it at face value, whether this is related to anti-Semitism or anti-Israel sentiment or not. But yeah, it was I think it was just a very interesting event to see in such a widespread manner how it was like revealed basically in a second on what was supposed to be like a cool new feature. And yeah, I think that's about covers it. We're going to be getting some like very, very interesting stories later on, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I think that whether we're talking about Twitter or we're talking about Beinart or we're talking about Candace Owens, the underlying theme is media literacy. People need to judge for themselves.
Absolutely.
What they're reading, even if it's the Jerusalem Post. Think before you read and think after you read.
Yeah, absolutely. Now for one of this week's top stories. President Trump has been ramping up pressure to designate the Muslim Brotherhood, an organization whose influence spans multiple continents and even institutions and universities on U.S. soil, as a terrorist organization. Here to discuss the implications and challenges of the move, we're joined by the Washington, D.C. coordinator for ISGAP, Dalia Ziada. Dalia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jake. Happy to be with you.
So first, I would like to ask you to kind of, introduce the audience, talk a little bit about who you are and what ISGAP does.
Personally, I'm Dalia Ziada. I'm an Egyptian writer and author, and I'm now based in Washington, D.C., where I work as a Washington, D.C. coordinator for ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, one of the very few academic research centers who has been on the forefront fighting against anti-Semitism and extremism in the United States and other places worldwide. We have actually offices in Cambridge, in Canada, in the United States. And most recently, we came up, we actually initiated a process to educate policymakers about the Muslim Brotherhood, and this is one of the things I'm very proud of being involved on.
I would guess start by setting a baseline for maybe some readers or listeners who haven't been following the news and don't exactly understand what this process is or where it is in the, like on the legal level, as in there were reports that Trump wanted to push in order to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. So has this already happened yet? Is it going to happen? Is there already proposed legislation on the table? Like where are we currently?
So right now we are living literally a historic moment. For the first time, an action on that level is being taken in the United States, targeting the Muslim Brotherhood by name. And I'm speaking specifically about the executive order that President Trump issued a few days ago. The most amazing thing about this executive order, number one, is that, first of all, it names the organization by name. It labels the organization a threat to U.S. national security, and thus asks the other authorities in the United States, especially the Treasury and the State Department, who are the two entities that can make such a designation, that can actually designate the organization according to law. It's not anything other than the legal procedure. These are the two entities that should decide and then label the Muslim Brotherhood a foreign terrorist organization. The designation is a process. Some people unfortunately expected it will be just one decision from the president and that's it. But it doesn't happen like this, especially in a liberal democracy like the United States. Like if, for example, it is Egypt or United Arab Emirates or Saudi, where the rulers or the people in power control everything, yes, it's easy to make such a decision overnight. But in a Western democracy like the United States, it's very difficult because it's a legal process. So where we are now, the legal process to designate the Muslim Brotherhood has already been initiated. The Muslim Brotherhood is already under pressure as a result of this executive order because it has to justify itself, it has to defend itself. The executive order also targeted three main chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood in three specific countries, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. We know Egypt, it's the country where the organization started, and we saw actually it's perhaps the easiest to document the atrocities of the Muslim Brotherhood and justify why they need to be labeled a foreign terrorist organization by the United States. Jordan and Lebanon are still difficult, but there is already evidence. And I believe the reason for targeting these three chapters in particular, because many of their members over the past decade or 15 years or so fled from these countries after being designated or banned in these countries, fled and came to the United States and other Western countries claiming to be political opposition or human rights activists and so. So if these chapters are designated, the link will be much easier to make with the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood inside the United States. And this is what matters for the Treasury and the State Department to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as an entire organization eventually.
And do you expect that, obviously, as you said, there's an ongoing legal process that has, formalities and procedures. Do you expect it nevertheless to go through and succeed and for this designation to happen in the end?
I'm very optimistic actually that this designation is going to happen because for many reasons. First, to understand why it's different this time, we have to look at how the Muslim Brotherhood evolved over time. The Muslim Brotherhood in the West the Muslim Brotherhood actors in the West, how they evolved over time. So from the very beginning, they learned that they have to manipulate the legal system, the political system, and work within this system, not to break it. Only in the last 2 years, we started to see them showing us the real ugly face for the first time, under the claim that they are supporting a humanitarian situation in Gaza, or criticizing, quote unquote, of course, we know it was not criticism, Israeli policies, right, and using this as an excuse to practice anti-Semitism towards the Jewish people inside the United States, and also as an excuse to demonize Israel and demonize the United States because of its support to Israel. So for the first time, we saw the coordination between the different factions of the Muslim Brotherhood and different organizations in the Muslim Brotherhood ecosystem in the United States. For the first time, we were able to link the dots between the violence happening in the ground by the actors of the Muslim Brotherhood inside the Middle East, and the actors of the Muslim Brotherhood who worked on whitewashing this terrorism in the United States and other Western capitals. That's why this time the designation is really possible. It's not as difficult as before. They cannot claim anymore, we're just organizations, peaceful organizations representing Muslims. No, you are representing an ideology that terrorist organizations affiliated to your group in the Middle East, like Hamas and so, adopt. And thus, you are also part of this ecosystem of the Muslim Brotherhood global network.
So you briefly touched on this already, but I think a question that a lot of listeners will be wondering about is, the Muslim Brotherhood has they have a history that goes back at this point decades. I'm not going to go into the whole entire history of the Muslim Brotherhood. I will be here all day, but and I obviously recommend everyone who's not familiar to read up on them. But given this vast history that they have, or that it has, whether it be, I don't know, the evidence or making this clear link that you talked about, a lot of people are wondering why is this only happening now? Are there other reasons besides the ones that you touched on? Like when a lot of people think about this kind of story, I think they tend to welcome the decision, they tend to welcome the action, but it's paired with a thought of, this is a no-brainer. Why was this only happening in 2025?
Yeah, there are also two other main factors, actually. The first factor is the political will. Finally, we have a U.S. administration that is willing to take an action on the Muslim Brotherhood without being afraid of all the accusations of Islamophobia targeting Muslims and all of that. The second factor, or the third factor, if we added the first factor, is that the Muslim Brotherhood showed us the real face in the past 2 years, right, in the aftermath of October 7. The second factor is the political will. The third factor is that finally we are seeing some kind of an organization happening in the ranks of liberal Muslims, reformist Muslims in the West. Before, the groups the groups affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood or ideologically aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood were the only one speaking in the name of Muslims in Western countries. Now, for the first time, we are seeing, reformist Muslims, liberal Muslims like myself are coming together and trying to push against this, and once again reclaim their identities that has been hijacked by these extremists. So all these factors together, and also the severity or the escalation we saw in the Middle East in the past few years, make it inevitable that now is the time to make it happen. Now is finally the time to make it happen before it's too late.
This paints a very good picture of where we stand today. Again, a lot of people would assume this is kind of a no-brainer. This is the obvious thing to do. But nevertheless, I don't think that should downplay the moment that we are currently in. I now want to move on to the implications, as in, assuming if this goes through, it passes through all the legal hurdles and the designation actually goes through, there are a bunch of implications that this has on many different levels. There's domestically in the United States. There's action, in the United States that don't necessarily relate to the Muslim Brotherhood directly. There's also, global effects because, as you said, like the Muslim Brotherhood is not just in America. It's in a bunch of different, there's chapters in different countries. So domestically, if this goes through, you already talked about connecting a link to certain individuals in the organization. The day this goes through, if this goes through, what's the next step? What happens? What does that look like? What action is being taken?
That's a very good question. There are different implications on different levels. So let's unpack them one by one. So on the domestic level, the immediate implication will be any organization that is publicly affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood or even ideologically aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood will be automatically shut down or banned. And thus, its actors like the directors, the leaders of this organization will be prevented also from doing other activities in the United States under any other names, which is great because we know the Muslim Brotherhood in the West are very clever with mutation or reincarnation, as I like to say, into other names and other groups. So this is one thing.
That's good.
Because now we are designating the main ideology. It's Islamism, not Islamists. There is a huge difference. So this is the first implication, which is positive and great. But actually, it has also a negative side because it will, right now, the Muslim Brotherhood empire in the United States alone includes thousands of Islamic centers. And these Islamic centers includes mosques, schools, sports clubs, social hubs, and so on. Now, there is no such a thing for American Muslims, for the ordinary Muslims, other than those owned by the Muslim Brotherhood. If you take this away, you have to give them a replacement. You have to give the American Muslims a replacement. Otherwise, you will create a gap wherein will jump the groups that are even more extreme than the Muslim Brotherhood, like the jihadists, the Wahhabists, and we don't want this to happen. We have to be very careful that while crashing the Muslim Brotherhood empire, while crashing the Muslim Brotherhood empire, we can also offer a proper alternative that is supervised by the government that can give the American Muslims this infrastructure that the Muslim Brotherhood has always offered. This is one thing. This is on the domestic level.
Can I actually ask on that point? Are there any U.S. discussions you're aware of that are taking place in order to find this alternative, in order to supplement something without just taking away the mosques and the social services and all these other institutions?
Unfortunately, so far, no. All the discussions happening either on the level of policy or civil society are mainly about let's get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood, but no one is paying attention to what may happen. It's kind of, as the Italians say, throwing the water with the baby in it, So let's be careful not to do that, actually. So I hope we can create pressure around this to make sure this happens. And I know there are alternatives actually, but they are not empowered enough. They don't have the funding, the power to create a similar infrastructure like the ones that the Muslim Brotherhood built over decades of their presence in the United States. So this is a domestic level. If you look for outside the United States, like on the diplomatic global level, there are also good sides and challenges. So the good side is that all the countries that are now hosting and welcoming the Muslim Brotherhood will find itself in a dilemma, will have to make a choice. Especially I'm speaking about Qatar and Turkey, who are on one side claim to be strong allies to the United States, and Qatar actually is hosting a military base, and Turkey is a NATO ally, and so a military base for the United States, and Turkey is a NATO ally. So this is on one side, but on the other side, they are supporting and financing and politically whitewashing the Muslim Brotherhood, which its ideology is all about destroying the Western civilization and the liberal democratic values that the United States represents and holds dearly. So they will have to choose after this designation whether to continue with supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and lose the United States, or choose the United States and thus change their policies, not only with the US, but also with their neighbors in the Middle East, Arabs, Israel, and so, in order to kind of open a new page of diplomatic relationship with all of them. So this is the challenge they will be facing. On another level, actually, there are some countries like Morocco, also in Jordan until recently, and I think there are still remnants of that, and other Arab countries, there are members of the Muslim Brotherhood in governments already, in government positions, in parliament, and so these countries will also have a problem because they will need to deal with that. They need to remove these people from power, and they also need to be careful while doing so to offer a replacement that is appealing to the Muslim communities in their countries, and at the same time is not as extremist as the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's
essentially mirroring what you were talking about in America.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, this is a many challenge, and I'm telling you this from experience because if you remember in Egypt in 2013, the Muslim Brotherhood came in power, then removed, then they were banned. But what happened after that, people don't know. The Muslim Brotherhood had a very strong hold over grassroots citizens in Egypt for many, many decades. Once they were banned and most of them arrested, many of them left the country entirely. Who filled in the gap? The Salafists, a group that is even more extremist than the Muslim Brotherhood. And they started to, now they are the ones in control of the grassroots citizens in rural areas and in places outside the urban Cairo and Alexandria and so, which is very, in my opinion, very dangerous, and we should have accounted for that. So I hope they can, like the US and other countries banning the Muslim Brotherhood, can learn from our mistake in Egypt.
I certainly hope so too. I think this then leads to a new discussion of where the fact that a decision was made to go through with this process, even though it hasn't, fully completed, is this a sign that, the Trump administration is planning to do more, not necessarily just against the Muslim Brotherhood, but against kind of any organization that, or any body or any foreign entity that does these similar actions? Because I know that ISGAP is very, very involved in this topic. I interviewed Charles Asher Smalls from ISGAP a little bit over a year ago, talking about, the Muslim Brotherhood, but also in general, just Qatar's influence on college campuses, which is something that has obviously gained a lot of prominence in the news over the course of the war. So do you think, in addition to this specific issue of the Muslim Brotherhood and replacing its influence, can we see similar moves from similar entities going to come out of this administration? And does ISGAP maybe have any policy in the barrel waiting to help push this forward?
Oh, yes, of course. Actually, we're working very closely with policymakers on also the other fight we have been, ISGAP, even before I joined them for so many years, have been fighting, which is a fight against anti-Semitism. Because what many people don't know is that actually Islamism and anti-Semitism go hand in hand wherever they go. Anti-Semitism is only one of the main tools that Islamists use in order to infiltrate into Western societies and at the same time mobilize supporters from other non-Muslim groups. The most provoking example we saw also in the past 2 years in particular was what I like to call the sinful marriage between the Marxists and the Islamists. Some people call it the Red-Green Alliance. Which was so shocking, and we saw actually its clearest manifestation was on American campuses. and also worldwide, I mean, but on American campuses in particular, where we started to see students who do not belong to Islam or even to the Middle East or to our chronic conflicts, starting to adopt anti-Semitism as a way of life and practicing it as a trendy thing, and that they are proud of. They are even taking videos of themselves while doing it and publishing on TikTok and whatever platforms they use. So we started to see that. And actually people may think, oh, it's just spontaneous reaction by naive students who don't understand anything. But no, it's very systematic. It's purposeful, and it was planned for by the Muslim Brotherhood groups on campus. The most important of the ideologically aligned groups to the Muslim Brotherhood, as we know, is Students for Justice in Palestine, which if we go back, we will see its clear connection to groups like American Muslims for Palestine and MSA and all the other student groups that started a while ago under the flag of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign. They just only mutated into a new organization today that promoted or claimed that they are standing up for a humanitarian situation in Gaza or supporting Gaza, but actually they were practicing and promoting anti-Semitism to the extent that they made it acceptable, by socially acceptable, to practice anti-Semitism.
Also, I think I remember, it's not just practicing anti-Semitism, it's openly embracing undisputable, like accepting content from undisputable terror groups. It's hard to remember sometimes because, so many things have happened over the course of the war, but at some point early on in the war, Hamas came out with their manifesto called, the Al-Aqsa Flood, Our Narrative, which was essentially their version of the October 7th massacre. And it was essentially being produced, published, and distributed and funded to be distributed on college campuses. So this wasn't just like a threat of something that might happen. This is something very tangible that we've seen, time and time again over the course of the past 2 years.
Exactly. And if you look actually at the literature of the Muslim Brotherhood, the main ideologues of the Muslim Brotherhood, the most famous one, perhaps Yusuf al-Qaradawi, he clearly instructed his followers in the West to use Palestine, quote unquote, which means in our language the Palestinian cause, as they understand it,
right,
as the glue to bring Muslim communities together and mobilize supporters from other groups like the radical left, the progressives, and so on. So, and this is exactly what they did. And why the campuses in particular? Because usually activism among student groups is the easiest thing to do. These are young people who want to feel like they are part of something bigger than themselves. They are not fully educated on the issues you're giving them. They are still so young and so fresh. And at the same time, they don't have something to lose. Like, they don't have a family that they would think,
right,
I shouldn't take the risk because of my family. And so this is usually the place that is very easy to recruit and indoctrinate, unfortunately, young people in, and they targeted it very, very successfully. And let me refer also to something very interesting. In July 2024, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence here in the United States issued a report about the encampments that happened in the academic year immediately before that.
Yeah.
And actually they said in the report that there were Iranian agents working closely with campus groups like SJP and others on organizing these encampments and these protests. So this shows you how big the foreign influence is, how big radical Islamists, regardless they are Sunni, Shia, whatever their background is, they are using the Palestinian cause. They are just following al-Qaradawi instructions of using the Palestinian cause as a tool, as a weapon to destroy Western civilization.
It really, I highly recommend anybody watching this episode to read up on it, because the vast scope is just astounding, really. Yeah, so I guess I could just leave it off there by saying that I think, we can all agree this is definitely a step in the right direction. I think we need to keep these challenges in mind. I think kind of in the same way that, where Israel's standing in the war right now with Hamas, it's easy to assume that it's over and there's nothing else to worry about, but there's actually a lot of fragile issues that still need to be ironed out. So we need to always be vigilant. But this definitely invites the right kind of action, and I could just say that we're very excited to see what future policy ISGAP has in store to deal with these issues. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jake. And for your audience who want to learn more about the Muslim Brotherhood, actually, we recently issued a report on the group and its activities in the United States, and it was presented to officials starting from the White House up to the Capitol Hill and so you can find it now on our website, isgap.org, and we're happy to receive any questions you may have as well.
Amazing. We'll link it to the bottom. I highly recommend everyone read their stuff. It's incredible stuff.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That brings us to the second top story of the week. The IDF struck and killed Hezbollah's second-in-command, Ali Tabatai, raising a lot of concerns if this will rock the already fragile ceasefire and agreement with Lebanon and Hezbollah. To discuss concerns that another front is going to reopen the northern border, as well as the status of the ceasefire in Gaza, we're joined by political analyst Sasha Majda. Sasha, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So, first, to just lay a baseline about the hard news, what happened. The IDF conducted a targeted strike on Hezbollah's essentially second-in-command and their military chief in an apartment building in Beirut. So unlike previous strikes that have happened recently, right, this was not an imminent threat, one would say, on Israel. This wasn't terrorists moving weapons. This wasn't rocket launchers aimed at Israel. This was a guy, for all intents and purposes, who obviously has a tactical, poses a threat to Israel. There was nothing imminent here, right? So what people are really wondering is, why did they strike now? Why did the IDF strike now? What was the purpose of this specific strike? And is this going to rock the boat on the already fragile ceasefire?
Yeah, so as you said, this was probably one of the most significant, if not the most significant strikes since the ceasefire began. Of course, it's not the first time that Israel has attacked terrorists in Lebanon since the ceasefire entered.
Right.
They've been carrying out small attacks whenever terrorists have been moving or spotted or carrying weapons. So it's not the first time. This is the new motto. Israelis like to call it the Lebanon motto of the ceasefire, where in order to enforce a ceasefire, Israel is the enforcer. This is exactly why the IDF carried out the strike on Ali Tabatabai in Beirut. This is actually probably the first attack also like this level in Beirut since the ceasefire entered.
Yeah, I think so.
And yeah, it is. And of course, it's putting Hezbollah in a very complicated position, in a very, very challenging situation for their leadership, what's left of their leadership. I mean, Ali Tabatabai was number 2. They have 2 choices right now. Either they respond, which of course would risk losing everything that they've achieved since the ceasefire began over a year ago. The other option is to do nothing, of course, but that would definitely reflect the weakness and expose the state that Israel's left them in since the ceasefire began. So 2 tough choices that the Hezbollah leadership is going to have to make, but it's the first time that Israel is really in a position of power and not really fear, which has been characteristic of Israeli action and policy in Lebanon prior to October 8th, actually.
So essentially you're saying Israel did this as kind of like a tactical move to put Hezbollah in this position to see how they're going to react.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. Does this count as them then enforcing the ceasefire through this model? Because again, whether we agree or disagree with Israel's decision to do this, to test the waters with Hezbollah, to put them in this position to either show weakness or take a risky response, I feel like some people would still say this still wasn't a threat, so this wasn't necessarily enforcing the ceasefire. This was kind of poking the bear.
So first of all, as long as Hezbollah exists in Lebanon, it's a threat. So let's clearly state that first of all.
Valid, yeah.
And also look at the point that Hezbollah has been rearming and regrouping in southern Lebanon. Of course, they're supposed to disarm and not have a presence south of the Litani. It's not the first time. Also in 2006 with the resolution 1701, that was also the case, but it was completely violated and ignored. The difference is that now Hezbollah regrouping south of the Litani is not going to be something that's ignored. And if we're looking at this being a violation of the ceasefire, or maybe not enforcing the ceasefire as the minor attacks have been actually doing, I would argue that this attack on Ali Tabatabai is actually putting pressure on Hezbollah as an organization and pushing back against their rearming and regrouping south of the Litani. Of course, taking strong action against Hezbollah also affects what they're able to do in southern Lebanon, and that is a critical threat to Israel. The Lebanese government has committed to disarming Hezbollah, but either they have not been able to or they're not willing to, and they've failed up until now. So Israel is not attacking Lebanese infrastructure, even though throughout months, especially prior to the ceasefire, there's been Israeli voices, even in the opposition, calling to attack civilian infrastructure, Lebanese government infrastructure, including Benny Gantz. But now that's not the case. Israel is specifically targeting Hezbollah infrastructure and hoping that Lebanese government will commit to their promise of disarming Hezbollah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's, it comes to no surprise that I think some form of action would have to come at some point. The Lebanese army has committed to this disarmament of Hezbollah. A few months ago, it actually seemed very hopeful because even, Israel's government expressed its gratitude for Lebanon for taking on this effort. But I think everyone can agree that what we see on the ground, it's not going so well. A few weeks ago, there was a report that the Lebanese army has ran out of explosives used for destroying Hezbollah caches and munitions. So it's clearly not going well, and that's kind of the state that we're in. So I can understand why Israel would take some kind of move of this sense. There's obviously questions here of whether it was too far, it was too inflammatory, but I don't think anyone's surprised given the state of how the disarmament's going. But I think that the main question that we expect to see here is, given this impossible position that you spoke about, is do you think Hezbollah will actually respond, go down that route? Or is it too weak and it can't afford to respond and it will just project weakness? And I'd follow that up by also asking is, how do you think Lebanon will respond to this? Is this a wake-up call for them to realize, okay, we're not doing enough. If we don't want these strikes to continue, we really need to up the pressure? Or are they going to take a back seat because they see that Israel's kind of doing the work for it?
Yeah, so first off, Hezbollah might respond. They might do it in a lighter manner because, of course, they know that if they were to respond, Israel would, of course, meet that with full force and actually up the attacks, especially also in the Beirut area.
So it might be symbolic.
So, yeah, it might be a symbolic response, but it's also risky for Hezbollah to take a symbolic response. It's also giving Israel the legitimacy and the backing, especially of the U.S., who completely backs Israel's actions, to actually strike further and to inflict more damage on Hezbollah. They got to be careful because they've also been able to rearm faster than they were being disarmed. And if they were to respond, that would definitely give Israel a green light to go ahead and to inflict more damage and to have them risk losing what they've built up since the ceasefire entered into effect. The Lebanese government, as you said, Israel's doing the job for them. For now, Israel is just doing what the Lebanese government has committed to do and hasn't been able to do. So, of course, we're going to see public statements by Lebanese leaders condemning this violation of sovereignty, even though the actual violation of Lebanese sovereignty is the existence of Hezbollah as both a political group and as an army, because they are in de facto occupation of Lebanon, and of course with Iranian influence. And I think that the Lebanese leaders, especially Joseph Aoun, the president, he doesn't want to have Hezbollah occupying his country. He doesn't want to be under Iranian influence. But it's such a delicate situation because Hezbollah also kills dissidents. Hezbollah has killed many political leaders in the past. Actually, Israel recently, Avichai Adri, the Arabic spokesperson, he exposed that Hezbollah had actually killed one of the Christian members of parliament. And Hezbollah had been actually the ones that had hidden that this had happened, and now it's actually coming out not from within Lebanon, but Israel is actually the one that's told the truth and shed a light on Hezbollah's actions to also local dissidents and people that oppose having Iranian occupation and Hezbollah presence in their country. So a lot of Lebanese, Israel's doing the work for them. A lot of Lebanese, especially journalists, they're starting to ask themselves, what has Hezbollah ever done for us? What is Hezbollah doing for the Lebanese people? They're asking questions about the Lebanese, about the port in Beirut. They're asking questions, especially since Israel was the one to expose the killing of this Lebanese Christian politician. What else could Israel expose and do that our leaders have not been able to stand up against?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been decades of corruption, so I can only imagine what else there's to unveil. Before I talk more about the current state of the war as it is locally, because we share a border with Lebanon, a border with Gaza and Hamas, I do want to pose a question about how this kind of affects the region, as in, independent of whether Hezbollah, I'd say, does a symbolic response or not. I'm curious what your take is on how other actors are watching this, specifically like Iran and specifically the Houthis. Because as it is right now, Israel is trying to come back down from like the 7 or 8 fronts to like a 0 front war, and they've managed to bring it down to 1, maybe kind of 2 if you count the flare-ups here. And Israel really doesn't want it to expand back into more additional fronts again. But do you think other actors in like Iran's terror proxy are watching these flare-ups and decide we need to get back into the picture again? Or do you think that kind of like Hezbollah, they're still weakened and recovering and they don't think this is really like the time for it?
Iran is in a very, very tough situation as well, in a tough position. We also see domestically the problems they're having with droughts, with water shortage. They're even talking about moving the capital.
Yeah, from Tehran, it's too expensive. Yeah,
exactly. So actually the president spoke about that. And Israel severely, severely weakened Iran, both militarily, also with the nuclear threat. We don't know if, in Trump's words, it was totally obliterated, as he says, but severely weakened. And we also saw that during the October 7th war, the Hezbollah actually failed Iran. Hezbollah's sole reason for existence was to be this launch pad for existential war against the state of Israel and to come to Iran's protection and defense in the case that there would ever be a direct confrontation between Israel and Iran.
Right.
Israeli officials always estimated this would be tragic to have a war with Hezbollah. They had expected thousands and thousands of civilian casualties that would occur in Israel. That wasn't the case. And I think that this fear that Israelis had of Hezbollah also reflects the success that Iran had created, this
for sure
ring of fire and this image, and terrorized Israelis, not just civilians, but also leaders, because the fear was real. And what we uncovered after the war with Hezbollah and during the war with Hezbollah is that Israel could take them on, and that this threat had been building up around us, and we had let it build up around us. It took October 7th for Israel to wake up to the threats around them. And I see, of course, October 7th is a total failure, and scares me to think that if it took this failure to understand the threat that was around us, October 7th could have been the end of the state of Israel.
Right.
Hezbollah could have entered and they could have met Hamas in Tel Aviv. What could have happened on that day is the end of this Jewish state. And right now, the successes we've had since then don't take away the failure. But that's why I like to categorize the whole situation as a failure on everybody's behalf. Israel failed in their covenant, in the sacred covenant of protecting their people, and the promise of never again, which is so characteristic of Israeli ethos. Hamas, Iran, and Hezbollah failed in destroying the state of Israel. And everything since then has been how both sides have responded to the failure. Hezbollah continued to fail Iran when they were unable to inflict further damage on Israel. They failed Iran when they did not come to protect Iran during the Iran 12-day war. And Israel has severely weakened them. So I think Iran is very nervous of what's left of their terror proxies around Israel.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope this doesn't spill into something bigger. If we come back now more locally and we bring Hamas into the picture, obviously they're not the same group. They have a partner in common, and they're both engaged in hostilities with Israel. So in the state with the war in Gaza right now, this week, Israel received the remains of Dror Or, one of the slain hostages, which now brings Israel, like the number of hostages remaining in Gaza, down to 2. So while obviously this is, a very significant achievement, and I don't want to belittle its efforts, Israel still very much has this vested interest to get all of the hostages returned before any continuation into phase 2 or the other terms of the ceasefire. However, I think Israel is in kind of like a tricky point right now because there is this fragility because, Hamas is playing games with the delays and trying to find out where the bodies are, even though a lot of the times they actually knew where they are. But it's kind of in their hands because we're not in those areas of Gaza. There's also pressure from the mediators to kind of have things go, continue anyway, even though not all the bodies are back. Witkoff was supposed to meet with Khalil al-Khaya, and Israel managed to get the beating down, but that was something that was supposed to happen. America's ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, is supposed to be coming to Israel, I believe, next week. So there is a really vested interest to, have things continue, have the schedule go as planned, despite the fact that the first phase hasn't been completed. So on one hand, obviously, Israel has a vested interest to get all of its hostages back before any continuing into phase 2. But on the other hand, the mediators really are pressuring to have this continuation, according to schedule. So I guess my question's in 2 parts being, one, how is Israel balancing these pressures? Because these mediators, especially the United States, really do have a lot of sway on our decisions, and we do want to make them happy, but we do have to, Israel has to stand on its principles and complete this first phase. And how does this potential flare-up add into the mix? As in, will mediators see this as a threat to the ceasefire and push them even further to get into phase 2 before it falls apart? Or will this tell them maybe we need to take a step back and reorganize the house first?
Yeah, so if we go back a little bit in time, we look at Hezbollah's stated goal when they entered the war on October 8th.
Yeah.
The stated goal was to end the Gaza war, was to end the massacre in Gaza, and they continued to pledge throughout the war they would not stop until the Gaza war was over. That didn't happen. Israel succeeded in ending the war with Lebanon and in reaching a ceasefire way before the conclusion of the war in Gaza.
Right.
So that, first of all, was a success. And that's also a bit telling of what's going to happen now in Lebanon and with regards to Gaza. We have 2 ceasefires, and we have Israel enforcing the ceasefire in both cases. As I said, that's the new motto of the ceasefire, which is not a passive ceasefire, which is built out of fear and containment policy. It is actually a ceasefire built on power and on strategic military and diplomatic achievements. Now the policy of containment is actually the one taken by Hamas and the one taken by Hezbollah.
Mm-hmm.
They have a vested interest in continuing the ceasefire, as of course they want to survive. And the one hope they have is of continuing this and hoping to rearm and regroup, which is also why it's so important to enforce the ceasefire, such as the actions taken in Lebanon, because both parties, especially Hezbollah, has an interest in the continuation of the ceasefire. They will only lose with an all-out war with Israel. And at the same time, Israel and Lebanon is hoping that the Lebanese government will fulfill and uphold their commitment. So that's on the Lebanese front. So let's separate the 2 and look at Gaza now.
Yeah.
Hamas also has the same goal and interest to survive and dreams of one day destroying the state of Israel and liberating Palestine from the river to the sea. That's their stated goal as well. Okay. And they will hope to have a continuation of this ceasefire and allow for them to stay in power. They have one chance of staying in power, and that's if this ceasefire continues and trying to find a way to navigate and
avoid
concessions,
disarmament.
Avoid disarmament. That's why the pressure from the mediators is so important as well. And I think that Trump, especially Trump, understands that the best formula for success, I mean, it's hard to say success in this region of the world, but success in Gaza comes from exerting pressure solely on Hamas, which is what we've been seeing led to the agreement.
Right.
It was when Trump came in and decided to pressure Hamas's backers, Turkey and Qatar, to pressure Hamas. The U.S. is the most powerful country in the world. They have leverage over everyone. So he was able to use this leverage and bulldoze his way towards this deal. And he was able to get Hamas to give up their most valuable asset, which are the living hostages, and until now, 26 of the deceased hostages.
Right.
The 2 remaining hostages, they must come home. The mediators must keep pressuring for this to happen. And we've seen that Hamas is only playing games, as you mentioned, to pretend that they don't know where the hostages are, to say that they found it, but give the wrong body. These are all games that they're trying to play to test the limits of the ceasefire. But they still have an interest in the ceasefire. They can't enter a war with Israel right now. They don't have the power. But what is problematic is how are we going to disarm them faster than they rearm. The same problem is in Lebanon.
Right. So actually, that's why I wanted to bring that in because, there have been, separate from this incident where there are some terrorists in tunnels in Rafah who are, trying to escape, and mediators are kind of trying to guarantee their return so that the ceasefire won't fall through. There is this issue because there are a lot of reports about, Hamas is continuing to rebuild tunnels within parts of the Gaza Strip that are like on their side of the yellow line, which is technically not a hard violation of the ceasefire, but this, if Hamas is meant to disarm, they shouldn't be doing this anyway, because what are these tunnels for? So there is this concern that every day that goes by that, Hamas, like, we don't move on to phase 2, but after only the hostages have been returned, that Hamas is actually just re-solidifying its position. And I think a lot of Israelis are concerned that, as we've seen with a lot of ceasefire attempts in the past, even in just this war alone, that maybe most of the goals of the agreement are reached, and then all sides involved, including the mediators, kind of get tired and say this is good enough. So I guess what I want to know is, do you think it's possible, not do you hope, but like, do you think there's a possibility that Hamas can weather this long enough and rebuild and refortify enough, whether this be through tunnels and stalling for time, that at a certain point, all parties involved, besides Israel, of course, can look at what's happened and say, they've given back the hostages and they've disarmed up to this point and they've done this and that, and this is good enough, and the international stabilizing force isn't going so well, so let's just call it here. Do you think there's a chance that when everything is said and done, there can still be a Hamas in power?
Hamas definitely believes there's a chance. That's
right.
Why they are playing these games, and that's why they agreed to the ceasefire, because they definitely saw a horizon where Hamas was still the rulers of Gaza.
Right.
Regarding what I think Israel is doing, first of all, the ISF, there's a lot of questions that arise. Which countries are going to send soldiers? Of course, Israel doesn't want Turkey and Qatar.
Right.
And of course, we have a say on our basic security requirements. But the question is, are countries going to be willing to send their troops to disarm Hamas, not to be a stabilization force, not to be a peacekeeping force, but actually be the ones that are going to confront full-on Hamas? I don't think they are. Depends on the leverage that Trump is going to put over them, what pressure Trump can exert on these moderate Arab countries, but I don't think the countries are going to be willing to send their boys and to disarm Hamas. It's a mission that only Israel was willing to do, and I understand it.
Right.
So that's why there's new solutions that are being looked at, including the Two Gaza plan, which is the closest we'll see to two states at the moment.
Right.
Dividing Gaza into the Israeli yellow line side and the Hamas-controlled side. And there's reports that the U.S. is going to build housing for the Palestinians, innocent Palestinian civilians, to move from the Hamas-controlled side to the Israeli side. I think that severely weakened Hamas. If I already mentioned before that the biggest weapon Hamas had was the hostages, the second biggest weapon, of course, are their civilians.
Of course.
So if you're taking away their hostages that they had, the strongest leverage they had over Israel, and you're taking away their civilians, you're essentially taking away the two key weapons that Hamas has used to launch attacks and hide behind civilians and the holding of hostages for years.
It's just the military competition, which obviously they don't actually stand a chance in that.
Exactly. In the military competition, of course, they don't stand that chance. And they've actually been brilliant and brutal in this technique of using their civilians as shields,
right,
and using hostages as leverage in negotiations. It's been a deadly pattern for Israel, and especially because one of Israel's biggest strengths is also the value of life. And Hamas knew that, which is why they know that when they take hostages, this is internally destroying Israel, internationally hurting Israel, and militarily hurting Israel. So the fact that the hostages are home is a tremendous achievement, and it's one step to weakening Hamas. Taking away their civilians is another step. They can't hide behind them anymore. But the other problem is, first of all, how many civilians could you bring to the Israeli side?
Right.
What are you going to do to disarm Hamas once the civilians are back?
Even just the filtering process to make sure that it's secure.
Exactly. Knowing
is a huge issue.
Knowing who's going to come in is an issue. And also, to leave civilians on the Hamas side, and even if Hamas disarms but remains in politics, as they've been floating the possibility, is a risk. First and foremost to the Palestinians, who will have a new generation of terrorists that are taught in Hamas
Absolutely.
schools, but also to Israel that's going to have to fight this fight down the line.
I think to sum up your take, it sounds that Israel does still have the upper hand on a lot of these fragile ceasefires, and the pressure is kind of going in Israel's direction, regardless of these little flare-ups here and there. It seems that the ceasefires will hold and will kind of continue in the direction that Israel wants, and then Israel will receive the backing if it doesn't. I sincerely hope that you're right, but we have to ask anyway, because you did mention how, you know, Hamas's tactics and the length of the war have kind of really damaged Israel internally. So if we look into Israeli society for a sec, you know, 2 years of war has been a very long time. A lot of the country has been mobilized in reserves. They've had to put their whole lives on hold for this war, which means, you know, being away from family, being away from their businesses, being away from their studies, being away from just their regular daily lives. If things were to take a turn in a way much more drastic than the way that you expect them to, and some of these tumultuous ceasefires do indeed fall apart, and there are another rounds of fighting, we have to ask: Do you think Israeli society, like how can Israel society handle another round of mass mobilization? What would that do to the country?
One of the main issues that divided Israeli society during the war was the hostage crisis. It should never have become politicized, but it did. And
Absolutely.
The fact that there were hostages severely hindered our ability to fight Hamas, and it severely also tore apart Israeli society. Everybody backed the goal of destroying Hamas, but the main friction, of course, is, you know, clearly also,
Right.
is that how do you do both, return the hostages and destroy Hamas? And what do you prioritize? And how do you fight Hamas while not risking the hostages? And what price do you pay? And that debate tore apart Israeli society. And if the hostages wouldn't have come home, that would have been a massive failure on every aspect.
Absolutely.
And a betrayal of the most basic condition to live in this country, which is trust in the army and trust that your country will do everything to save you in a time of crisis.
Right.
So the fact that they're home allows for healing, and I think that a next, and hopefully this won't happen, but a next round of war would have further backing by Israeli society. The war in Hezbollah, with Hezbollah, actually had much more backing, especially because there weren't any hostages.
Right.
And it also showed on the battlefield.
Especially there was also a big backing by citizens in the north.
Yeah.
Who were
if you go
displaced.
to the north, the topography, it is astonishing.
Yeah.
Metula, for example, it's surrounded 270 degrees by Hezbollah.
Right.
Southern Lebanon. And it's down. It's on the bottom. It's all mountains around it looking down, and citizens of Metula have lived for years seeing terrorists pointing rockets at them, only waiting to launch.
Right.
There could have been a ground invasion. They planned a ground invasion. It would have been catastrophic. And the fact that there weren't hostages allowed us to fight stronger and clearer and more precisely as well. When you go to the north, you also see that the neighborhoods in many of these border towns, they are built in specific areas that are protected from rocket attacks.
Right.
When you go, you ask, why don't you build it there? There's a lot of space. And what do they tell you? We can't, because it's exposed to Hezbollah attacks. So the situation in the north was waiting to blow up, and the citizens of the north deserve safety, so there's full backing to bring them to safety. And this is the same case in Otef Aza. They deserve safety. Everyone in Israel needs to live with safety, and that's why fighting terror is so important. It's not just a foreign war, it's a war for our basic right to exist and live. So I see hopefully no return to war, but if there is, I think there would be more backing in Israeli society. Of course, there's still the issue of the Haredi draft, but that's a topic for another podcast.
Yeah, probably.
Sharing of the burden. So I think it would also really tear apart Israeli society to have another multi-front war, long, prolonged war, with the same conditions of the Haredi recruitment, which are currently in place.
I don't know if it would be same conditions. As you were mentioning the dilemma of the hostages, I would also imagine that if, God forbid, there was another round of fighting, which obviously we both want to happen, and I think we don't expect to happen.
We don't want to happen.
Yeah, we don't want to happen. I don't know if I didn't say that, but yeah, we don't want it to happen. But would also then hope it would be a lot quicker and more decisive.
Definitely.
Because I think, again, even for completely legitimate reasons, the indecision, I think, was a big factor that really put a strain. Look, all of that's hypothetical. I mean,
Yeah,
I
because
think
it's also hard to fight a war when your society is torn about the fact that you have this war. Israel has always failed in wars that didn't have the full backing.
Absolutely.
So that's a huge issue, too.
So, of course, this is all hypothetical if things don't go the way that you analyze them to be, but I like your version a lot better, so we're going to hope for that instead.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for joining us on another news-packed episode. We'll be back in the same place next week, but in the meantime, you can find the best coverage for Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish diaspora at jpost.com.